Well, everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want, or my guest wants, in this particular case, as this was a big suggestion from my guest, my very good friend, Haley. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for taking my extremely heavy-handed hint that I needed to discuss this particular topic.
Yes. And this is a spoiler talks episode of my talk show, and we're going to be talking about Arcane, which this show I can't describe in Netflix land the existence that television lives today. There are very few shows that have blown up the way that this show has blown up. Like Netflix has Bridgerton, Netflix has Stranger Things, Cobra Kai to some extent, and then Arcane. And this is based off of League of Legends, the game that all of my friends spent tireless hours playing in college, which I did not play. And then I'm like, what happened to my friends? They spent 12 hours today playing League of Legends. So I did not have strong positive feelings about League of Legends. And I'm like, they're making a show based off of League of Legends. Okay. And then the show happened, and you're just like, holy crap, this had no right to be as good as this was. And this was Netflix's approach to what if we release 3 episodes every Saturday to release this show. And so Netflix dabbling in the idea of having weekly releases, which was
hmm
the complete opposite part of their plan of what made them Netflix, but whatevs. I have a lot of feelings about release schedules for streaming shows, and you could go check them out on a different episode of this talk show with my buddy Mike, who and I watch way too much television. But Haley, why did you want to talk about Arcane?
Well, like you, I've never played the game. And I'm actually not even normally someone who's like tripping over myself to watch the newest animated thing. I don't watch a ton of animated stuff. So the
Hmm.
fact that this like had the impact that it did on me, I think just says that much more. Like I certainly enjoy animation, but this was like sort of maybe this and those Spider-Verse movies have sort of reset in my mind like what animation can be and what just a sheer pleasure it is to like feast your eyes on something. Because it's this movie, or sorry, these episodes, there are not very many of them, but a
Hmm.
lot happens. You get sucked right into it. And I think it really has it all. I mean, it's got a compelling series of plots. It's not
Yeah.
one plot, it's like a couple plots that are very masterfully woven together. It's visually stunning and
Yes.
has like an absolute unrelenting set of bangers as the soundtrack.
Yes. For sure.
And perhaps the most important thing for me is like after I was done with the show, I had a lot of trouble not thinking about it. It bugged
Hmm.
me. I kept thinking about it. I kept coming up with more things that, intrigued me and that I kind of wanted to think through and talk through. And that's literally why I was like, Shane, you're gonna be the guy who I
Yep.
have to like
So
process this with. But yeah, that's why we're
I'm
here.
just I'm gonna run through this. So this all released in November 2024. Probably would have recorded this earlier if I had watched it earlier. But I did not. Um, but just to read off, so these are the ratings on IMDb for each of these episodes: 9.0, 9.0, 9.4, 9.2, 9.5, 9.7, 9.5, 8.9, and 9.3. If your worst episode and your only episode under a 9.0 is an 8.9, that's saying something. This is such a high quality show. And yes, there is, if you're speaking about animated television, this is second to none in terms
Hmm.
of just visual splendor that you get to see on screen. It's so creative, it's so dynamic, the colors, the animation style is so sleek and textured and cool to look at. There's so many great moments with music that just whisk you away, and you're just like, what am I watching right now? And it's just fully engrossing and dynamic. Just from a visual and auditory standpoint, this show is absolutely incredible. And that's not even getting into, story. Which, just to give the basic background here. So amid the stark discord of twin cities, Piltover and Zaun, two sisters fight on rival sides of a war between magic technologies and clashing convictions. So, very broad strokes, obviously, in terms of the plot. And this show is 18 episodes, 9 episodes each season. I'm really surprised this ended with 2 seasons, to be frank.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the biggest criticism that I saw of this second season is that they put a lot into this second season and had to
Yes.
wrap up everything.
Mm.
And I don't know, I watched it and sure, it was trying to tackle a lot of things, but it was still very satisfying and a lot of emotion, a lot of big
Oh
moments.
my gosh. Yeah.
The voice cast, even just looking at like the two main leads. You have Haley Steinfeld and Ella Purnell in this. Like, you're doing pretty darn good for yourself.
Hmm.
Speaking of Spider Verse, with
Hmm.
Haley Steinfeld, who is Gwen Stacy in that, and Ella Purnell is also killing it in Fallout, one of the other biggest
Mm.
recent shows on streaming for sure too. And these two are just so great in bringing these characters to life and bring so much emotion to it. And that's the thing, like this show is has no shortage of emotion and impact as you go through this crazy wild conflict that makes up this
Hmm.
show.
Hmm. And something that I think is really interesting. I mean, obviously they're tackling like a lot of really big themes, but something that I found to be, I don't know, especially like interesting just in how they approached this whole concept. And I've talked to Shane about this before, but
Mm.
when when the when the last or when the first season ended, I remember I watched it and then I was like, wow, like the cliffhanger of all cliffhangers, first of all. Like you watch the first season and like you think they tackle a lot in that season. Then you see the second season, and I had watched like a couple episodes of the second season, and then I decided to go back and watch the whole thing again before finishing it because they had broken up like the release. And so between the release of the first few episodes and the second few episodes, I ended up rewatching the whole thing straight through. And what is crazy is like the even just the amount of time in which all of this happens. Like there's a time skip in the first season and in the second season to a degree, but like this is sort of like a sprint. And the fact that
Yes.
between the first season and the second season, no time passes. So like while for the viewer it had been, I don't know, a year or two between the seasons.
Yeah, because this came out the very beginning of November this year.
Hmm.
It had been, God, it had been 3 years.
It had been 3 years. Holy crap. I
Yeah.
didn't know how long it had been. But like, and so yeah, so like all this time passes, but it's zero time passes between the two. So you pick up right away. And I feel like the reason why that's relevant is so Vi, who like, I mean, I am both love her and am in love with her, like, because oh my God, come on. She's just there's just so much there. I mean, but she as a character, like there are moments when I think you could be harder on her, but then you have to remember that no time has passed. Like she was in jail. Like
Hmm.
like days ago. Like she'd just been in jail for like 5 years or something and was like a hardened like prisoner who had been abused and like unrightfully imprisoned for like her like the later part of her adolescence. And now she's been broken out and she's like figuring everything out. Like she doesn't know anything about what happened to her sister. She doesn't know anything about, and it's so like all of this all of the plot and stuff, I think when you remember that, it's easier to be like, okay, I understand why things are playing out this way. Because I will say, the first couple episodes, it felt a little bit like, oh, come on. Like, what is all this, like, drama? Like, why are you being so weird about Caitlin being a police officer? Like, come on, whatever. But then you look back and you're like, oh, right. These people were beating the crap out of her like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So,
She
yeah.
it's such a interesting dynamic, especially at the core of this show, that this is about sisters
Yes.
and these sister cities and
Hmm.
being put on the opposite ends of this conflict. And both of these characters, it's like we understand like what they've been through,
Hmm.
and it's a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's always interesting when you having being a sibling, and turning out pretty different than your sibling,
Hmm.
in many ways, and just seeing like how different people deal with the same kind of trauma and
Hmm.
experiences, and how this kind of morphed their experiences. And like Haley Steinfeld's so incredible as Vi in this show. And you just, you know, to your point, the first couple episodes, a lot of processing of like what the hell's happening here. And before really taking ownership of like, this is what you gotta do. And this whole entire show leads up to like that final episode is insane amount of conflict
Hmm.
and a giant clash of all of these characters coming to blows. And it feels so satisfying once you get up to that point, and just the journey that these characters go on and all this trauma and everything, and trying to bring together, because like you're right, it's like how that first season ends is shocking and just completely changes the
Hmm.
course of where this show's gonna go. And
Hmm.
the fact everybody had to wait 3 years. Honestly, I think that was like either you just keep getting more anticipated watching a show, or you kind of lose interest after a while because it's taken so long. Unfortunately, I think I got to the point where I'm just like, this is never coming out. Why am I waiting so long? So I wasn't in a rush to watch it. But then when I finally did watch it, like this knocks your socks off. It is such an
Worth the wait.
incredible, yes. And like I know I've seen a decent amount of people feeling a little underwhelmed by this second part, and I would not use that to describe. It's like
What did those
this,
people watch?
I feel like it's one of those kind of situations where like I understand that it like this feels like they're like, well, you only have one more season to tell the rest of this, which I really wonder, was this a creative decision by those who made the show or a Netflix decision? Because I can't imagine it
Hmm.
was a Netflix decision. Like I would
Hmm.
assume that
Yeah.
they would want to milk the hell out of this if they can.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's a lot. There's a lot that happens in the second season, and how it all comes together is really satisfying and impactful, though.
Yeah, and you know what? I feel like something that the the parts of this that really stuck with me and that kept like getting in my brain were like the first season is very much like there was this past that kind of explains how why the characters are the way they are, and then you get to the present and they sort of act upon those decisions. And so
Mhm.
you're left feeling like, okay, I know who these people are. The second season, like, just totally complicates everything, but in like I think a really important way.
Mhm.
Like everyone gets a lot more complicated. And so Caitlin, she was kind of just this stuck up, like privileged girl who wanted to, she was good and had a sense of justice, but she was still pampered. Then her mom is murdered by this girl she has a crush on, her sister. And she has to navigate that situation, and the way she does is real and visceral and like that's real. That is hard, and she's coping and
Mhm.
under like coming to terms with the fact that like as much as she wants to hate this other side of this world, it might not be justified. And so
Yep.
like there's that. Then you've got like um Echo and that whole like rebellious thing that's happening, like and the creativity of like him and his characters as like as a offsetting um what Heimerdinger was doing, and then them kind of like weirdly joining forces and clashing but still working together. And you've got um uh and then of course Jinx, who like
Yep.
you already know she's a very troubled character. But
Yes.
then that little sister character again throws everything into a turn because like yeah, Jinx lashed out and caused all these problems, but even as she did that, she turns around and fosters, like gives this child like a reason to live and becomes her
Mhm.
inspiration and is like they didn't have to do all of that. They could have told a much more straightforward story, but they didn't. They still attempted everything they were trying to do, and I would argue like you don't have to like beat everything to death. You can leave certain things like you can explain it up to a certain point and then you can allow like me to ponder it for days and weeks later, like just thinking over like the journey that each of these people went through. Same thing with and I'm so bad with names. There's Jace and then there's the woman who is his like love interest who's on the council. Can't remember her name for some reason. Um
There's a lot of characters in this show, and also my weakness in terms of watching shows and movies is I'm not great with character names. Uh,
yeah. But her mom is like a very
Mhm.
interesting like
Mhm.
wrinkle to this whole situation too.
It's one of the most interesting dynamics because you feel like romance can really get in the way of something like this with so much going on, but just Vi and Caitlin's dynamic with each other is so interesting, and it's
Hmm.
so challenging because obviously they both have their own personal motivations in the greater scheme of this whole dynamic between these two cities, but then it's just like you want to like pull for them to be able to like be together, and it's just like
Hmm.
the world keeps pulling them apart.
Yes. And
And
I normally hate romance because I'm like, I don't want like it's always but with oh, I was so into it. I was like, come on,
well,
you
and
love each other.
there's so many moments between them that also get like really intense.
Hmm.
um and where it's just like it's a fine line between anger and frustration and then just sexual tension. um
Yes. They did such a good job with all of that. And again, I was like such a puddle about it where
yep.
normally I'm like, no, screw romance. I'm just so not into it at all. But I was like so riding that wave the whole time.
Well, and like there's literal moments where all this tension overflows into
Hmm.
things
Hmm.
getting a little hot and steamy between these two characters. And while all leading up to like this final conflict with like I just remember watching this finale just being like, and then this happened. This happened. I felt like I was watching Game of Thrones, like a big
Yeah.
climactic episode of Game of Thrones where it's just like, oh my God, things keep happening. And like these aren't just like a bunch of small things. Like
Mm,
these are like major conflicts. And the action in this is so
hmm
intense and so well realized. And that's one of the things where I feel like animation never gets enough credit for action. Because like
hmm
I feel like most people are just like, well, if it's an animated movie, it's not an action movie. Or like the action isn't that great. But like you can really do some amazing things with action and animation. And this show shows it
hmm
because it
Absolutely.
is brutal and the conflicts. There's like all out war
Hmm
between these two cities by the time they get to this ninth episode. It's just wild,
Yeah.
wild, and it's exciting. Um, there's there's stakes, there's consequences, and I feel like by the time you get to the end of this show, you know, like things aren't going to turn out great for both of these sisters, and
Yeah.
you're just like, where's the tragedy gonna lie? And like I feel like, and obviously this is a spoiler talk, but like I feel like Jinx was not destined to have a very happy ending in this show. And you certainly get to that point where you're just like, oh no, we're here. And like that's a really
Hurts so bad.
powerful and emotional moment. Cause I'm trying to I have the plot synopsis for the last episode on here because so many things happened.
Oh my God,
And
yeah.
so many things happened. And
I can't listen to the song that plays at the end of that. Like even just thinking about it, like I'm getting emotional.
I
It's
can tell you're
so
getting,
like
I'm just looking at you and I can
I
tell you're getting
know. Oh my
emotional.
God. It's like yeah. Because you get so invested in these characters. Like
Hmm.
and I mean I for people to know I cry easily, but like I don't think I've ever cried in a conversation with you, but I knew I would if we would get to talk about the end. But yeah, go ahead with your synopsis.
Trying to navigate. So like there's how it's like gets to the and it's just like Jinx winds up sacrificing herself and for her sister to protect her. And it's just like it's one of those shows where I'm like, do you expect something like that to happen? Probably, but it
Hmm
doesn't emotionally prove for
No.
when that moment is. And that's the sign of a great show or a movie is that like you know what's gonna happen, but like and it happens and you're still emotionally devastated by how it hits.
Well, it's how
Um
they did it too, with the scene. I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it.
and
Yeah.
and it's one of those kinds of things where it's just like this all built up to this point. This whole entire show is sister cities, these two
hmm
sisters, and and everything that Jinx has been through, and especially where like the season one finale, because like it's really interesting when a show purposefully only has two seasons
hmm
because it kind of feels like that part one, part two.
hmm
And usually where part one leaves you is a pretty dark place.
hmm
And where it leaves Jinx is a very dark place. And doing something pretty damn bad. And where it's just like, oh no, can she come back from this? But then making that ultimate sacrifice. It's a very cathartic moment of her, you know, trying to make up for everything that's gone on between the two of them in this show. And it leaves you with Vi and Caitlyn at the end, where it's just like, can they finally be together after all of this? Because there was so much conflict even between the two of them.
Hmm.
Because Caitlyn having these expectations of Vi and what Vi would do, and Vi not wanting to be a part of what Caitlyn was doing. And this season pushed Caitlyn to some places where she had to take ownership and control of this situation and maybe doing some things that she might not be super proud of later.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what's so harrowing about this series is that all of these characters have had to do things. And these things are not going to be stuff they're going to look back and be like, I'm proud of this. This is the
Hmm.
kind of conflict where everybody does stuff, but it's not going to be things they're going to be happy about later.
But I actually think so. Two reactions to this like conversation. One is, again, League of Legends means nothing to me as a game, but the
Yep.
idea of legends, like
Mhm.
these figures, and there are like quite a few of them that they jammed into this show, but these are
Yep.
clearly larger than life individuals,
Yep.
and the decisions they make truly impact the course of this whole place. And that is what a legend is. And so I
Mhm.
feel like the show did a great job of,
Yep.
yeah, you're used to like there being main characters and people being like overpowered and whatever, but this is very much like these people are still vulnerable and
Mhm.
they are swept up. And then my second point is that I could see some people not liking the whole time element that they weaved in, but I personally, this was the stuff that I kept going back to, like when I was thinking more about it. And I feel like it was a really interesting and like it just added a layer of like understanding again to these characters, making them that much more complicated and interesting. You could say, like, well, why did you muddle like Jinx's timeline by having Echo go to that other realm and like fall in love with her there? Like what was the point of that? And the point that I've come to is that you have one timeline where Vi dies.
Mhm.
And when Vi dies, because again, these are legends, and then what they do and what happens to them shapes the whole universe around them. When she dies, Jinx never like Jinx copes.
Mhm.
She she becomes a normal, healthy, like sad, but just a sweet person, who just lives out her life. And when they show those glowing, the arcane magic that she has in her drawer, but
Mhm.
she never chooses to use it. When it was her choice, she never uses it. It's in the timeline that we ultimately follow where Vi does not die and Jinx is sort of not tricked, but like she only ever does anything out of love.
Yeah.
Like she's the ultimate, like she's shaped by those around her and like that's like her love for, you know, each of these characters throughout her life influences the whole universe. And that's why we end up in this mess, is because she wants to, she's been being encouraged to tinker and use her power for evil.
Mhm.
But we get to see a reality where she doesn't do that. And that's so
It
important.
it's so very interesting that multiverse storylines are so popular right now.
Yeah.
And I know like probably the biggest thing that like multiverse wise that people think about is Marvel at this point because and like I'm very weary of
Hmm.
multiverse stories because there's the opportunity to do away with the weight of consequences because it's like, oh, we
Hmm.
could just bring in this character from this multiverse, but if you leverage it correctly, This is used for an incredible character moment
Mm-hmm.
and idea and experience where it's just like, look at the life that Jinx could have had.
Right.
And it's tragic that she doesn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you could think about it, it's just like there were timelines where this wasn't your life.
Yeah.
But not this one.
Right.
This is the one that we have. And if you can leverage it and see like even with like Spider-Verse and how it deals with like there's like canon events.
Mm-hmm.
These
Yeah.
very specific things that always have to happen to a
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man
Mm-hmm.
to be Spider-Man.
Yep.
And sometimes that loss and that pain and that suffering is, that lack of a better word, required of your
Mm-hmm.
experience to be who you are. And realizing that none of this was, and then that she could have lived like a normal life, but also, lost her sister.
That's the thing. We love Vi too, so it's like I had so much turmoil because I was like, what this story is basically saying is one of them's gotta die.
Yeah.
In the end, one of them dies. And
Well,
both
and I
stories
feel
are legitimate. But
I
but we
feel
get to
like
see both.
I feel like you even know from the start that this kind of story is destined for something like that. But that
Yeah.
just makes it so much more concrete and impactful when they actually show it.
Yeah.
And just being like, either way, one of you is not going to make it out of this situation okay. And it's sad, it's depressing. And after everything that happens in this, it feels like the only way out for Jinx is to sacrifice herself.
Mm,
And, there's certain characters and media that have that journey. It's, Luke saving his father,
mm,
but Vader can't survive that. Like, how's Vader going to answer to everything that he did?
mm-hmm.
Like, it was that last sacrifice protecting his son that was going to be like, this is it. It's time to die. Um, Obviously that causes all other kinds of ripples because like if Vader was there to at least be like, yeah, not evil anymore. I did this. Don't bring back the Empire or the First Order or whatever you want to call it. But like here, you have Jinx going through all of these things, all the things that she's done, and it takes one sacrifice to try to make up for it. And her knowing that, like, basically, like, it's either one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And she take, and that's very powerful, you knowing that you could have a good, like, honestly, a good life if your sister dies, which is really tragic to think about, and still making that decision to be like, you're going to be the one.
Well, I don't even know if she knew, but Echo saw
Yeah.
it. And I
Mhm.
guess I think it's rougher for him because also he fell in love with her and then she dies. And although, okay, I don't know. I want your opinion on this. I feel like they left it tiny little bit open that maybe she didn't die.
It's
There were those the architectural blueprints they were looking at the very end. It almost made me feel like they
so
were
I
trying to
have
figure. Okay.
so I want to read this one sentence from the synopsis to
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Working together, they destroy the wild rune, disappearing in the process. However, Vander remains feral, prompting Jinx to protect Vi by blowing him up along with seemingly herself.
Right. And because the show is over, we don't know, but I'm actually kind of okay with this Inception, like the top is still spinning at the end situation. It's like the one thing that sort of and I get it. I'm just telling myself this because
So
again, it was so horrible and emotional to be like she had to do that, but
I my favorite podcast by far is called The Cinephiles, and I listen to them every week. Steve Morris and John Roca take a deep dive into films. They were just doing, they're in the process of, as we're recording this, they're in the process of going through Miller's Crossing, the
Mm,
Coen brothers film, because they're doing a month of the Coens, which makes me extra
mm,
happy. And they've mentioned this a couple times on the show. Every great film is a mystery
mm. Yeah, yeah.
because stories are better if there's mystery to them.
Hmm.
It adds depth and intrigue, and you're not quite sure what's going to happen. And this show ends with mystery.
Hmm. Right.
Is Jinx dead? What's going to happen between Vi and Caitlin? We don't 100% know, but it's the intrigue that's going to keep us thinking. We didn't need a little epilogue on the end, just being like, and this all wrapped up nicely, and I hope you enjoyed this journey through Arcane. Feel like this show feels like the show that should have had a nice little bow on the end.
Hmm.
Like, and it leaves it up there. It leaves it out there in the universe. And there's certainly some great stories that have those kinds of moments. It's just like somebody seemingly made the ultimate sacrifice, but it's just like they need to 100%. And
Hmm.
what's going to happen? So
Hmm.
interesting.
Because, they also, there were other things that they did more decisively wrap up,
Yes.
and which was good. Again, like I'm glad about it. But I liked that they gave me that tiny little glimmer because I held on to it for dear
Hmm.
life.
Haley's still sitting there being like, Jinx is still there. Jinx is still alive.
If it were,
And
if you're asking my opinion, I think that this show was very intentional. Like there was so much in there. They did not put anything superfluous. Like everything was in there for a reason because it was jam-packed. I'm choosing to interpret that those last series of scenes as they're suggesting that she's out there somewhere.
if you don't see a body, don't trust it.
Right? Right? Exactly. And this is a
And even
magical world.
and even sometimes if you do see a body, that doesn't matter either.
True.
Um, but if you don't see a body, don't
It's
trust it.
right.
And that's the thing, it's like you don't know. We
Hmm.
don't know.
And these are legends after all. I mean, these people are a pretty big deal.
These are stories passed down by generations.
Hmm.
Um, but no, this show is pretty damn great. And the fact that this is only 2 seasons, 9 episodes a pop, like this is gonna be a show that lasts with people, I feel like.
Hmm. I will rewatch for sure. But I now it's gonna be kind of like every time I watch Interstellar, where I just have to be ready to sob uncontrollably at certain parts. Like I just accept it. I just have the tissues ready.
And it's like do 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 do, and just the organs start playing, and it's just like no.
Ah,
That movie does get, well, that's the thing. I certainly have films where I'm just like, am I prepared to be hurt again?
yeah, right. Just come crawling back.
I keep crawling back.
I
I
hurt
thought I was
myself
asked.
again.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just gonna sit there. I'm gonna watch Arcane again and just have Hurt by Johnny Cash on in the background on loop. It's just like, I hurt myself today. See if I still feel. And it's just like, Logan's one of those movies for sure. And they
Yeah,
use that song in the trailer. Oh,
they knew what they were doing.
they sure as hell knew what they were doing. But no, this show, just from like a technical standpoint, is hands down one of the most amazing animated shows that I've ever seen. It's
Hmm.
just absolutely incredible. And there's just so much emotion. and complexity of characters and dynamics. And it had romance that made you buy in. It had this um sisterly bond that challenged you. It just this show really made it work. And
Hmm.
all based off of a video game that I've never played and the long track record of video game adaptations being crap.
Yeah. And as I understand it, the for people who have played the game and stuff, they actually somehow managed to like make these people, even though they are all beautiful in the show, they're not as unrealistic as from what I've heard the video game characters are. So not only have they done everything else that we've discussed, but they also managed to like create a more realistic body type for the people. And I'm not saying these people are not still idyllic, because they are. Trust me. I think about it all the time. These are beautiful people. But like they're not like, that it's not like everyone has a double D and like they look a little more realistic. Um and I respect that on top of everything else.
And it's crazy too because like I didn't even realize there's like is there plot to this game? I thought it was just like you pick champions and you fight each other kind
Yeah,
of
pretty
thing, but
much.
like there's characters in here and like actual champions like Caitlyn's from the game,
Mm-hmm.
Echo's from the game,
Mm-hmm.
and like these are actual people that you get to fight as.
I do
And
think
I
they incorporated like if you play the game and you know these characters, the things they do in the show do like definitely there are plenty of callbacks as I understand
because like I know like Vi,
it. Mm-hmm.
like I'm pretty sure like I recognized her
Mm-hmm.
as like a character for sure. But yeah, good for Netflix for accomplishing this. We are in an age where video game television shows are really killing it, whether it's Fallout or this or The Last of Us, which
Mm,
I don't know if my body is ready for The Last of Us Part 2 to come out
God.
on HBO.
Talk about hurting yourself. I know I'm gonna do it. I know I'm
Oh,
gonna just crawl right back into that, but yeah, oh God. That's
that
another one.
that show every episode was like wow, and then the last 10 minutes happened and then I'm just like it's not okay. I'm not okay with
I'm not
this.
okay. Yeah.
Uh but Haley, hopefully this conversation did not upset you too much. Uh,
No, it was very much needed. Thank you for being willing to go on this journey with me.
absolutely. And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland review.